The auctioneer's gavel echoed through Millbrook's town hall like a gunshot. Maya Chen raised paddle number 47, her heart hammering against her ribs. $25. That's all that remained in her checking account after David took half of everything in the divorce. Sold to the dark-haired lady in the back. The auctioneer, a balding man with a graying mustache, looked more relieved than satisfied. No one else had bid on St. Catherine's Church. Maya glanced around the nearly empty hall, just a handful of local curiosity seekers who stared at her with a mixture of pity and amusement. A 34-year-old Asian woman, unemployed architect, buying a burned-out church in a town she barely knew. Perfect, she thought bitterly. Another impulsive decision for the collection. Outside, October wind whistled through the golden leaves of century-old oaks. Maya walked down Main Street to the property she'd just purchased, the keys weighing heavy in her pocket like an uncertain promise. St. Catherine's Church rose against the gray sky like an open wound. The fire 3 months ago had devoured the roof and blackened the stone walls, but the structure remained solid. Shattered Gothic windows looked like empty eyes watching her approach. Dead ivy clung to the walls like withered fingers. Maya took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs. The smell of charred wood and something else, something sweet and cloying, hung in the air. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking slightly. Not from the cold. The heavy oak door groaned open, revealing the gutted interior. Afternoon light filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows across the debris-strewn nave. Burned pew fragments lay scattered like broken bones. The altar somehow had survived mostly intact, a massive slab of white marble stained gray with soot. "Jesus," Maya whispered, her voice echoing in the hollow space. "He ain't been here for a while, honey." Maya spun around, heart leaping. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, backlit by the fading sunlight. She was small and wiry, wearing a faded floral dress and a cardigan that had seen better decades. Her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "Sorry," the woman said, not sounding sorry at all. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm Dolores Mackenzie. Live next door." She gestured toward a small Victorian house visible through the trees. "Saw you poking around. Figured I'd introduce myself to the new owner. Maya Chen." She extended her hand, which Dolores shook with surprising strength. "Chinese. Korean-American, actually." Dolores's expression didn't change. "You know what happened here?" Maya nodded. "Fire. That's why I could afford it. Fire's just what they told the insurance company." Dolores stepped into the church, her shoes crunching on debris. "Pastor Thorne started that fire himself, 3 nights before he died. Locked himself in his office, poured gasoline everywhere, struck a match." A chill ran down Maya's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. Suicide? That's what Sheriff Brennan ruled. Easy enough. Old preacher, recent widowhood, depression. But folks around here know better. Dolores moved deeper into the nave, running a gnarled finger along a scorched pew. William Thorne had secrets. Dark ones. The kind that eat at a man's soul until there's nothing left but ash and regret. Maya followed her, drawn despite herself. What kind of secrets? The kind that destroy families, end marriages, ruin lives. Dolores's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The kind that get people killed. The old woman's words hung in the air like smoke. Maya felt something shift inside her chest. A familiar stirring she hadn't felt since before the divorce. Curiosity. Purpose. As an architect, she'd always been drawn to the bones of buildings, the hidden structures that held everything together. But this felt different. More personal. "Why are you telling me this?" Dolores studied her with those sharp eyes. "Because you bought this place for $25, girl. Nobody does that unless they're running from something or looking for something. Which one are you?" Maya didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the altar, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The marble slab was cracked down the middle, a jagged line that split the carved cross in half. Behind it, the wall was decorated with a massive mural of Christ's crucifixion, the paint blistered and peeling from the heat. "Maybe both," she said finally. "Then you better be careful." Pastor Thorne spent 40 years collecting confessions from this pulpit. People trusted him with their deepest shames, their worst sins, and he kept every single one. Maya turned. "What do you mean, kept them?" But Dolores was already walking toward the door. "Get yourself some good locks, honey. And maybe a security system. This town's got a long memory and short patience for outsiders stirring up old ghosts." "Wait." The door slammed shut, leaving Maya alone in the gathering darkness. She pulled out her phone, its screen casting a pale glow across the ruined sanctuary. No signal. Of course. She made her way carefully through the debris toward the back of the church. A narrow hallway led to what must have been the pastor's office and living quarters. The door was warped from heat but still solid. Maya tried the handle. Unlocked. The office was a disaster. The wooden desk had partially collapsed. Its drawers spilled across the floor. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents reduced to ash and fragments. The smell was stronger here, that sweet, cloying odor she couldn't quite identify. Maya kicked at the debris, searching for anything salvageable. Her foot struck something solid. She knelt and brushed away ash and paper fragments, revealing a metal filing cabinet. The top drawer was stuck, warped by heat. She grabbed a poker from the fireplace and pried it open. Empty. All 4 drawers, completely empty. Damn it. She sat back on her heels, disappointment washing over her. What had she expected? Some convenient explanation for why her life had fallen apart? A roadmap to redemption hidden in the ruins? She was about to leave when something caught her eye. The filing cabinet sat slightly askew, as if it had been moved recently. Maya grabbed the poker and leveraged it away from the wall. Behind it, a section of the wooden paneling was darker than the rest. Newer, less damaged by the fire. Her pulse quickened. She ran her fingers along the edges until she found what felt like a hidden latch. The panel swung inward with a soft click, revealing a narrow recess about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. Inside were 17 leather-bound journals and a wooden box carved with religious symbols. Maya's hands trembled as she lifted out the first journal. The leather was soft and well-maintained, untouched by the fire that had consumed everything else. She opened it to the first page. The Confessions of St. Catherine's Parish Volume, 1983. For the sins of the fathers shall be visited upon the children. Pastor William Thorne Maya flipped through the pages. Each entry was dated and initialed, written in precise handwriting that grew more erratic over the years. The first few were mundane: adultery, theft, lies. But as she read deeper, the confessions grew darker. September 15th, 1985. RB. I killed my wife. Made it look like an accident. The brake lines were so easy to cut. She never suspected. The insurance money will pay for Jenny's college. October 3rd, 1987. MH. The fire at the Murphy farm wasn't accidental. I needed the land. 23 people died, including children. I can still hear them screaming. Maya's stomach churned. She slammed the journal shut and grabbed another one at random. March 22nd, 1994. SW. I've been poisoning my mother slowly for 2 years. Arsenic in her tea. Everyone thinks it's Alzheimer's, but I'm just tired of caring for her. The inheritance will be worth it. Entry after entry. Confession after confession. Murder. Arson. Child abuse. Embezzlement. Each one more horrific than the last. Each one signed with initials and dated with clinical precision. Maya opened the wooden box. Inside were hundreds of small envelopes, each labeled with initials and dates corresponding to the journal entries. Her fingers shook as she opened one at random. A photograph fell out. A man she didn't recognize standing over a shallow grave, a shovel in his hands. The back was marked, RB, September 1985, insurance. She opened another envelope. Bank records showing large cash deposits. Another contained a recording device, one of those old microcassette recorders. With growing horror, she realized what she was looking at. Evidence. Pastor William Thorne hadn't just been collecting confessions. He'd been documenting them, photographing them, recording them. He'd been blackmailing his entire congregation. Maya sank to her knees amid the journals and evidence, her mind reeling. 40 years of secrets. 40 years of leverage. No wonder no one else had bid on the church. No wonder Dolores had warned her. The people of Millbrook weren't just protecting their privacy. They were protecting their lives. A sound made her look up. Footsteps. Heavy boots on the wooden floor of the nave, moving slowly toward the office. Maya's blood turned to ice. She quickly shoved the journals and box back into the hidden compartment and pushed the panel closed. The footsteps stopped just outside the office door. I know you're in there, lady. The voice was gravelly, unfamiliar. Male. Maya held her breath, pressing herself against the wall behind the desk. Found something interesting, did you? The door creaked open. A figure appeared in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a sheriff's uniform. Maya caught a glimpse of his badge in the dim light. Sheriff Tom Brennan. Come on out. Let's have a chat about what you might have discovered in old Pastor Thorne's hidey hole. Maya's mind raced. How did he know about the hidden compartment? How did he know she'd found anything? Unless... You cleaned out the filing cabinet, she said, stepping into view. Before the fire. Sheriff Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Smart girl. Yeah, I got here about an hour after the old bastard lit himself up. Took everything I could find, but I always wondered if there might be more. The confessions. The evidence. You know what he was doing. Hell, lady. Half the town was paying him to keep their mouths shut. Other half was too scared to do anything about it. Thorne was clever. He never took money. Just favors. Information. Alibis when needed. You helped him. Brennan shrugged. I looked the other way. Big difference. Now, why don't you hand over whatever you found, and we can pretend this conversation never happened. Maya's hand moved instinctively toward the hidden panel. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't be stupid. You think I didn't see the light from your phone moving around back here? This town has been quiet for 3 months. Peaceful. You want to stir up old graves? People are going to get hurt. People are already hurt. The victims are mostly dead. Brennan stepped into the office, his hand resting on his holstered gun. The ones who aren't, well, they've made their peace with the past. You'd be wise to do the same. Maya backed against the wall, her mind calculating distances, escape routes. The window behind her was boarded up. The only way out was past Brennan. What happened to Pastor Thorne, really? She asked, stalling for time. I told you. Suicide. You killed him. Brennan's expression hardened. William Thorne killed himself the day he decided to play God with people's lives. I just helped him along. Because he was blackmailing you too. Because he was going to expose everyone. Near the end, the old fool developed a conscience. Started talking about confessing everything to the FBI, making amends. Couldn't let that happen. Maya felt along the wall behind her, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers found the poker she'd used earlier. So you murdered him and staged the fire. I cleaned up a mess before it could destroy this whole town. Brennan took another step closer. Same thing I'm doing now. Maya gripped the poker tighter. There are people who know I'm here. No, there aren't. Checked your phone. No calls out since you left the auction. No friends, no family in the area. Recent divorce. Unemployed. Desperate enough to buy a burned-out church for $25. His smile was cold. Perfect victim profile. The reality of her situation hit Maya like a physical blow. She was completely alone, trapped with a corrupt sheriff who had already committed murder to protect his secrets. And somewhere behind the wall were 17 journals full of evidence that could destroy dozens of lives. The confessions, she said desperately. If something happens to me, people will come looking. They'll find what I want them to find. A tragic accident. Maybe the building wasn't as structurally sound as it looked. Maybe some debris fell on the new owner while she was exploring. Brennan drew his gun. These old churches can be dangerous places. Maya's grip tightened on the poker. Her mind raced through architectural calculations. Load-bearing walls, structural weak points, potential collapse zones. As an architect, she'd studied building failures extensively. You're right, she said quietly. They can be. Before Brennan could react, Maya swung the poker hard against a support beam that had already been weakened by the fire. The wood cracked with a sound like thunder. She hit it again and again, until the beam split completely. Above them, something groaned ominously. What the hell? Maya dove past Brennan toward the door as a section of the ceiling began to sag. The sheriff spun to follow her, but debris started raining down. She heard him curse as something heavy crashed behind her. She burst into the nave, gasping, as part of the office roof collapsed with a sound like breaking bones. Dust and smoke filled the air. You bitch! Brennan's voice roared from somewhere in the wreckage. I'll find you! Maya ran toward the front of the church, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard the sheriff climbing through the debris, still pursuing. She needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what to do with the information she'd discovered. But as she reached the main door, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Voices, multiple voices coming from outside. Sheriff said she'd be here. Make it quick, quiet. What about the body? Maya backed away from the door, trapped. Brennan behind her, armed men in front. She looked around desperately for another exit, another option. Her eyes fell on the altar. The massive marble slab was cracked down the middle, but beneath it. She ran toward the altar as the front door exploded inward. 3 men in dark clothes entered, guns drawn. Maya dove behind the marble slab, just as bullets started flying, chips of stone exploding around her. "Where is she?" one of the men shouted. "Behind the altar," came the reply. Maya pressed herself against the cold marble, her mind racing. The crack down the middle of the altar wasn't from the fire damage. It was deliberate. A seam. She ran her hands along the base until she found what felt like a lever mechanism. The altar began to move. Beneath it was a stone staircase leading down into darkness. Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone for light and descended into the unknown depths below St. Catherine's Church, pulling the altar closed above her just as boots pounded across the nave floor. In the suffocating darkness beneath the church, surrounded by the smell of earth and old stone, Maya realized her $25 purchase had just become the most expensive decision of her life. Behind her, she could hear muffled voices, the scrape of the altar being moved. They would find the staircase soon. She had to move. But as she descended deeper into the tunnels beneath Millbrook, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Pastor William Thorne had planned this moment long before his death. The hidden compartment in his office hadn't been his only secret. And in the darkness ahead of her, something was waiting. Something that would make the confessions upstairs look like children's prayers. The stone stairs descended for what felt like forever, each step echoing in the narrow tunnel despite Maya's efforts to move silently. Her phone's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rough-hewn walls that wept with moisture. The air grew colder with each step, carrying scents of earth, decay, and something else, something chemical and sharp. Behind her, the voices had faded, but Maya knew they were still searching. Sheriff Brennan wouldn't give up easily, not with 40 years of corruption at stake. The staircase finally ended in a narrow corridor that stretched in both directions. Maya paused, trying to orient herself. If her mental map was correct, she was now beneath the church cemetery. The tunnel to her left would lead toward Main Street, while the right passage headed toward the residential area where Dolores Mackenzie lived. She chose left, toward town, reasoning that she needed to reach people, witnesses, safety, but after 50 feet, the tunnel forked again, and again. She realized with growing unease that Pastor Thorne hadn't just dug a simple escape route, he'd created an entire underground network. Maya stopped at the 4th intersection and really looked at the walls for the first time. The stonework was too precise, too old. These weren't tunnels that Thorne had excavated. They were pre-existing, possibly dating back to the Underground Railroad era. The pastor had simply connected them, expanded them, made them his own. Carved into the wall at each intersection were symbols, crosses, numbers, initials. Some matched the entries she'd seen in the confession journals. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a map. Her phone buzzed. Somehow, down here, she had a signal. Unknown number. Stop running. We need to talk. Maya's blood chilled. They had her number. Of course they did. In a small town, finding personal information wouldn't be difficult. Another text. Pastor Thorne left something for you specifically. Check tunnel C7. Maya stared at the message. How could Thorne have left something for her? He'd died 3 months ago, and she hadn't even known Millbrook existed until this morning. Unless, she thought back to the auction, to how easily she'd won the bid. $25 for a church and property that should have been worth thousands, even burned. The auctioneer's relief when she'd raised her paddle. The way the few locals had stared at her, not just with curiosity, but with recognition. They were expecting me. The thought was insane, but it explained too much. Maya pulled up the listing she'd seen online 3 days ago, the one that had made her drive 4 hours from Cincinnati on impulse. She'd told herself it was about starting over, finding something she could restore with her own hands. But looking at it now, with growing paranoia, the listing was too perfect. Posted exactly when she'd been searching for property, priced exactly at what she could afford, located just far enough from her old life to feel like escape, but close enough for a day trip. Someone had wanted her here. Maya followed the tunnel symbols, using the carved markers as a guide toward C7. The passage gradually widened, and she began to notice alcoves cut into the walls. Most were empty, but some contained objects, books, photographs, small personal items. In one alcove, she found a child's stuffed rabbit, faded and worn. In another, a wedding ring on a silver chain. Trophies, she realized. Mementos from the people whose confessions filled Thorne's journals. C7 turned out to be a larger chamber, roughly circular, with a domed ceiling carved from solid rock. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, spanning decades. Men, women, children. Some Maya recognized from the journals, their faces now connected to the initials and horrific confessions. But in the center of the chamber sat something that made her legs weak. A desk. A perfectly preserved wooden desk with a letter addressed to Miss Maya Chen in precise handwriting. Maya approached it with shaking hands. The envelope was sealed with red wax, impressed with the same religious symbol she'd seen on the wooden box upstairs. She broke the seal and unfolded several pages of heavy paper. My dear Maya, if you are reading this, then my plan has succeeded, and you have taken possession of St. Catherine's Church. I pray that you will forgive the deception, but I had no choice. Time was running short, and I needed someone with your particular combination of skills and circumstances. You are here because I researched you extensively. Your architectural background will help you navigate what I've built beneath this sacred ground. Your recent divorce has left you vulnerable but determined to rebuild. Most importantly, your father's suicide when you were 12 has given you the psychological framework to understand what drives people to confess their worst sins. Maya's hands trembled. Her father's suicide wasn't public knowledge. She'd never posted about it on social media, never discussed it in interviews or professional contexts. The only record would be in sealed therapy files from her teenage years. You wonder how I know such intimate details. The answer is simple. I have been watching you for 2 years, ever since David Chen began confessing his plans to destroy you financially and emotionally. Yes, my dear, your husband was one of my penitents. His hatred of you, his elaborate schemes to take everything in the divorce, his affair with your sister, all of it confessed in this very chamber. Maya sank into the chair behind the desk, the letter fluttering in her numb fingers. David had been here. David had confessed to Thorne. Her divorce hadn't been the result of growing apart or incompatibility. It had been calculated, planned, orchestrated. David paid me well for my silence, as did your sister Rachel. But I am old, and cancer is consuming me faster than I anticipated. I will not live to see justice done through conventional means, so I have arranged for the evidence to come to you. In the drawers of this desk, you will find documentation of every crime confessed in my 40 years of service. Not just the journals you discovered upstairs. Those were copies. The originals are here, along with photographs, recordings, physical evidence, and most importantly, bank records showing payments made by each confessor. Maya pulled open the top drawer with numb fingers. Inside were thick files, each labeled with a name instead of initials. She recognized some from the journals. The Breakline murderer was Robert Burke, town council member. The arsonist was Martin Hayes, who owned the hardware store. The woman poisoning her mother was Sandra Walsh, the elementary school principal. But the largest file was marked David Chen and Rachel Chen Morrison. Maya opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside were dozens of cassette tapes, photographs, and documents. The first photo showed David and Rachel together in what looked like a hotel room, clearly taken without their knowledge. The back was dated 2 years ago, 6 months before David had asked for the divorce. A cassette tape was labeled David Chen, Initial Confession, March 2023. Maya found an old tape player in the desk drawer and pressed play. Her husband's voice filled the chamber, clear and confident. I need to destroy my wife completely. She's too smart, too capable. The divorce alone won't be enough. She'll recover, rebuild. I need to break her psychologically. Take her confidence, her savings, her family relationships. Rachel thinks I'm doing this for her, but really, I just want to watch Maya fall apart. Maya fast-forwarded through hours of recordings. David confessing to hiding assets. David planning to seduce Rachel specifically because it would hurt Maya most. David describing in clinical detail how he would gaslight her, make her doubt her own perceptions, isolate her from friends and colleagues. The beautiful thing is, she'll blame herself. Maya always does. She'll think she failed as a wife, as a sister. She'll retreat, probably move somewhere remote, become a hermit. Perfect victim psychology. The tape ended. Maya sat in the silence of the underground chamber, fury and heartbreak warring in her chest. Everything she'd thought about her marriage, her divorce, her family, all of it had been a lie, an elaborate psychological torture designed to break her spirit. But Pastor Thorne had recorded it all, documented it, preserved evidence of the cruelest kind of abuse. Maya opened another drawer and found a letter addressed to the FBI, completely written and sealed, detailing every crime and providing an index of evidence. All it needed was a signature and a trip to the nearest field office. But there is a complication, Thorne's letter continued. The network of corruption in Millbrook runs deeper than even I knew. Sheriff Brennan, Judge Morrison, Mayor Campbell, all of them are compromised. Some are confessors themselves, others are simply bought and paid for. If you attempt to expose the truth through local channels, you will disappear just as others have. The only way to survive is to use what I have taught them to fear: mutually assured destruction. Every person in my files is connected to every other person. Expose one, and they all fall. They know this. It is why they tolerated my blackmail for so long, rather than simply having me killed. But you, my dear Maya, are not part of their network. You have no sins to hide, no crimes to cover up. This makes you both powerful and extremely dangerous to them. Maya heard footsteps echoing down the tunnel, multiple sets, moving systematically, searching every passage. They'd found the entrance. She quickly gathered the most damaging files: David's confession, Sheriff Brennan's involvement in 3 murders, Mayor Campbell's embezzlement of federal disaster funds. The evidence was overwhelming, but she needed to get it to the right people. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number, Chamber C7. We know you're there. Come up peacefully and no one gets hurt. Maya looked around the circular room and noticed something she'd missed before. Another passage, hidden behind a tapestry depicting Christ's resurrection. She moved the heavy fabric aside and found a narrow tunnel sloping upward, Thorne's final escape route. She gathered as many files as she could carry and squeezed into the passage. It was barely wide enough for her shoulders, clearly designed for one person at a time. The perfect bottleneck if anyone tried to follow. The tunnel climbed steeply, and Maya could feel cold air flowing down from somewhere above. An exit. She pushed forward, ignoring the stone scraping her jacket, focusing on the promise of fresh air and freedom. Behind her, she heard voices echoing in the chamber she'd just left. She's gone. Found another tunnel. Damn it. How many ways out of this place are there? Too many. We need more men. The tunnel finally opened into what looked like a storage shed. Garden tools hung on the walls, and bags of fertilizer were stacked in the corners. Maya pushed open the door and found herself in someone's backyard, about 3 blocks from the church. The house was dark, but she could see lights in neighboring windows. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the corruption festering beneath their town. Maya pulled out her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report multiple murders and a conspiracy involving local law enforcement in Millbrook. Ma'am, can you repeat that? Did you say local law enforcement? Sheriff Tom Brennan has been covering up murders for decades. I have evidence. Recordings, photographs, documents. I need federal agents, not local police. There was a pause. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay on the line and provide your location so we can send someone to speak with you. Maya heard something in the dispatcher's voice, a certain careful neutrality that made her paranoid. How many people in the county were compromised? How far did the corruption spread? Never mind, she said, and hung up. She needed to get out of Millbrook entirely, drive to the nearest FBI field office and dump everything in their laps. But first, she had one more stop to make. Maya crept through backyards toward Dolores Mackenzie's Victorian house. The old woman had warned her about stirring up ghosts. Maybe she'd also know how to contact them. Dolores answered the door before Maya could knock, as if she'd been expecting her. Found the pastor's treasure room, did you? The old woman stepped aside to let Maya enter. Figured you would. You have that look about you. The kind that doesn't let sleeping dogs lie. Maya followed her into a cozy living room filled with doilies and family photographs. You knew about the tunnels. Honey, I've lived next to that church for 60 years. I know about everything. Dolores settled into an armchair and picked up her knitting. Including what William Thorne really died for. Brennan killed him. William Thorne killed himself, but not the way the sheriff wants people to think. Dolores's knitting needles clicked steadily. The night before the fire, William came to see me, told me he'd found out something that changed everything. Something about who was really running the show in Millbrook. What do you mean? All those years, William thought he was the puppet master, pulling strings, controlling people through their confessions. But turns out, someone was pulling his strings too. Someone who wanted those confessions collected, documented, preserved. Maya felt ice forming in her stomach. Who? Dolores set down her knitting and fixed Maya with those sharp eyes. Someone who needed a complete catalog of every dirty secret in town. Someone planning something big. Something that required knowing exactly who could be controlled and how. The person who arranged for me to buy the church. Now you're getting it. Dolores stood and moved to the window, peering through the lace curtains. William realized he'd been played. All those years of blackmail, and he was just collecting intelligence for someone else. Someone who was about to use it for something much worse than money. What could be worse than 40 years of murder and corruption? Dolores turned back to Maya, her expression grave. 40 years of murder and corruption was just the foundation. The real plan is just beginning. Before Maya could ask what she meant, the lights went out. The entire neighborhood plunged into darkness. "Get down!" Dolores hissed. Through the window, Maya could see vehicles surrounding the house. No headlights, no sirens. They moved with military precision, dark shapes against the darker night. "Back door," Dolores whispered. "Now." But as they crept toward the kitchen, Maya heard the distinctive sound of boots on the back porch. They were surrounded. Dolores grabbed Maya's arm. "The basement. There's another way." They descended wooden stairs into a cellar that looked exactly like what you'd expect from a Victorian house. Stone foundation, exposed beams, shelves of preserves. But Dolores moved confidently to a section of the wall and pressed against a particular stone. A section of the foundation swung inward, revealing yet another tunnel. "Jesus Christ," Maya breathed. "How many of these are there?" Millbrook was a major underground railroad hub, Dolores explained as they descended into the passage. These tunnels connected every major building in town. Most people forgot about them after the war, but some of us kept the knowledge alive. The tunnel was wider than the one beneath the church, with electric lights strung along the ceiling. Clearly it had been maintained and upgraded over the years. "Where does this lead?" "The old train station. Been abandoned for 20 years. But the basement connects to the main tunnel system." Dolores moved with surprising speed for her age. "From there, you can get to the highway without being seen." Behind them, Maya could hear the sound of splintering wood. They'd broken into the house. "Who are they?" Maya asked as they hurried through the tunnel. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?" Dolores's voice echoed off the stone walls. William thought he knew, right up until the end. But whoever's really behind this, they've been planning for decades. Long enough to get their people into every position of power in the county. They reached a junction where several tunnels met. Dolores paused, listening for sounds of pursuit. "Why are you helping me?" Maya asked. "Because I've been waiting 40 years for someone like you to show up." Dolores's eyes glittered in the electric light. Someone from outside. Someone with nothing to lose. Someone smart enough to put the pieces together. "What pieces? I still don't understand what this is really about." Dolores smiled grimly. "You will. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere you can study those files without worrying about bullets." They continued through the tunnels, Maya's mind reeling with questions. Pastor Thorne had been collecting confessions for someone else. David's betrayal had been orchestrated as part of a larger plan. The entire town was compromised. But to what end? And why had they specifically wanted her here? What was so special about an unemployed architect with trust issues and a talent for finding hidden structures? The tunnel began to slope upward again. In the distance, Maya could see the faint outline of stairs leading to what must be the abandoned train station. But as they climbed toward the exit, Maya's phone buzzed with another text message. Unknown. Number. The train station is surrounded. We've been tracking your movement through the tunnels. There's nowhere left to run. Maya showed the message to Dolores, whose face paled. How could they know about the tunnels? "Because," said a familiar voice from the shadows ahead of them, "some of us never forgot the old ways." Sheriff Brennan stepped into the light, his gun drawn. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 3 other figures Maya recognized from the photographs in Thorne's files: Mayor Campbell, Judge Morrison, and a woman she didn't recognize, but who wore the crisp uniform of a federal agent. "Hello, Maya," the federal agent said. "My name is Deputy Director Sarah Chen. I believe you have something that belongs to us." Maya's blood turned to ice water. Chen, the same last name as her ex-husband. "That's right," the woman continued, noting Maya's expression. "David is my nephew. This whole elaborate charade was designed to get you here, to this moment, with Pastor Thorne's files in your hands. Why?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "Because 40 years ago, we began an experiment, a study in social control through managed corruption. Millbrook was our test case, a small isolated community where we could carefully cultivate and document criminal behavior, then use that behavior to control every aspect of civic life." Maya's mind reeled. The FBI hadn't been collecting evidence to prosecute crimes. They'd been creating and managing them. "Pastor Thorne was our asset from the beginning," Deputy Director Chen continued. "Every confession, every piece of blackmail, every cover-up, all of it served our purposes, until William developed a conscience and threatened to expose the operation. So you had him killed. We had him eliminated, yes, but we needed someone to inherit his work, someone with the skills to understand what he'd built, and the personal motivation to want revenge against the people who'd wronged her." Maya looked at the files clutched in her hands. David's confessions, evidence of his calculated cruelty. Even that had been planned. "You wanted me to find this. You wanted me to hate him enough to use it. We needed someone who would be willing to take extreme measures. Someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose." Deputy Director Chen smiled coldly. "Someone who might be willing to become the next Pastor Thorne." The truth hit Maya like a physical blow. They didn't want to stop the corruption in Millbrook. They wanted her to take over managing it. Maya stared at Deputy Director Chen, her mind racing through the implications. 40 years of orchestrated corruption. Her divorce, her bankruptcy, her isolation, all carefully engineered to bring her to this moment. "You're insane if you think I'll become part of this. Are you?" Chen stepped closer, her voice soft and reasonable. "Think about what you've learned tonight, Maya. Your husband systematically destroyed your life for sport. Your sister betrayed you for money. Your entire support system was carefully dismantled to leave you vulnerable and desperate." Maya's hands tightened on the files. The recordings of David's confessions burned like acid in her memory. "We're not asking you to become a monster," Chen continued. "We're asking you to become what you already are, someone who sees the hidden structures that hold society together, an architect of human behavior. By blackmailing people, by covering up murders, by maintaining order." Judge Morrison stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "Do you know what Millbrook was like before the program? Drugs, gang violence, economic collapse. We gave people stability, prosperity, peace. All it cost was their secrets." Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her in the tunnel. Sheriff Brennan, corrupt, but believing he was protecting his community. Mayor Campbell, embezzling funds but using them to keep the town running. Even Dolores, standing beside her, seemed less shocked by these revelations than Maya would have expected. "How long have you known?" Maya asked the old woman. Dolores sighed. "Long enough. My late husband Frank was one of the first test subjects. Got caught stealing from the bank in 1984, and instead of prosecuting him, they offered him a deal. Confess everything to Pastor Thorne, and they'd make the charges disappear. And you just accepted it? Honey, Frank was looking at 20 years in federal prison. Our daughter Sarah was only 8 years old. What would you have done?" Maya felt the walls closing in, literally and figuratively. The tunnel seemed smaller, the electric lights harsher. Every person she'd met since arriving in Millbrook had been part of the deception. "The auction," she said suddenly. "Nobody else bid, because they knew what was coming. We needed the right person," Deputy Director Chen confirmed. "Someone with architectural skills to navigate Thorne's underground network. Someone psychologically primed for revenge. Someone isolated enough that their disappearance wouldn't immediately raise flags." "Disappearance? Well, that depends on you, doesn't it?" Chen smiled. "Play along, take over Thorne's role, and you get a new life. Refuse and, well, these old tunnels have claimed many lives over the years. Cave-ins happen." Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it reflexively and saw a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Now." She looked up at Chen. "More manipulation. I have no idea what that is. Maya opened her email app, her hands shaking slightly. At the top of her inbox was a message from an address she didn't recognize. Thorn.William1943protonmail.com. The timestamp showed it had been sent 20 minutes ago. That's impossible, Sheriff Brennan said, reading over her shoulder. Thorn's been dead for 3 months. Maya opened the email. Maya, if you are reading this, then my dead man's switch has activated. I programmed it to trigger if certain keywords appeared in electronic surveillance of the Millbrook area. Keywords like Deputy Director Chen and Social Control Experiment. I discovered the truth about my role in their program 3 weeks before my death. I was never their asset. I was their test case. They wanted to see how far they could push a moral man into becoming a monster. The answer, it turns out, is quite far indeed. But I retained enough conscience to prepare for this eventuality. In addition to the files you've discovered, I created something else. A complete record of the federal program that created Millbrook, including the names of every agent involved, every politician who authorized it, every academic who designed it. I called it the Testament Protocol. The files are hidden in a location that only you can access, using your specific combination of architectural knowledge and personal motivation. But you'll need to escape your current situation first. Look for the keystone. William Thorn. Maya looked up from her phone. The keystone? Deputy Director Chen's face had gone pale. What does that mean? But Maya was already studying the tunnel around them with architectural eyes. The electric lights, the junction where multiple passages met, the careful stonework that had been maintained for over a century. This wasn't just a hiding place or an escape route. It was a structural focal point, the keystone of the entire underground network. You chose this location for the confrontation, Maya said slowly. Not because it was convenient, because it's the heart of the system. What are you talking about? Maya ran her hands along the curved ceiling, feeling for the slight variations in stonework that would indicate the central support stone. Her fingers found what they were looking for, a block carved with the same religious symbol she'd seen on Thorn's wooden box. Underground Railroad engineers were brilliant, she said, still feeling along the stone. They built these tunnels to last, but they also built them with fail-safes, ways to bring down sections if they were discovered by slave catchers. Maya, step away from that wall, Chen said, her voice sharp with alarm. The keystone isn't just structural, Maya continued. It's also a trigger. Remove it, and this entire junction collapses, along with anyone standing in it. Sheriff Brennan raised his gun. She's bluffing. Nobody would bring down a tunnel with themselves inside. Maya found the hidden mechanism Thorn had described in his writings about the church's architecture. A simple lever, disguised as a decorative element. You're right, she said. Nobody would do that unless they had another way out. She pressed the lever. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a grinding sound echoed through the tunnel, growing louder as the keystone began to shift. Killer! Chen shouted, but Maya was already moving. She grabbed Dolores and pulled her toward one of the side passages as gunshots echoed through the junction. The electric lights flickered and went out as the ceiling began to sag ominously. This way, Maya shouted over the sound of cracking stone. They stumbled through the darkness as the tunnel behind them collapsed with a roar like thunder. Maya used her phone's light to guide them through a passage she prayed led somewhere other than a dead end. Behind them, she could hear screaming, cursing, the sound of people trapped by falling debris, but also the sound of at least some of them digging their way out. How did you know that would work? Dolores gasped as they ran. I didn't, Maya admitted. But Thorn was an amateur architect before he became a pastor. He understood structural engineering. He wouldn't have mentioned the keystone unless it meant something. The passage ahead began to slope upward. Fresh air flowed down from somewhere above. Another exit. But Maya could also hear sounds of pursuit echoing from the collapsed junction. Not everyone had been trapped. They climbed toward the surface, Maya's mind racing. Thorn's Testament Protocol, a complete record of the federal program. It was exactly what she needed to expose the truth. But first, she had to survive long enough to find it. The passage opened into what looked like the basement of an old house. Maya could see moonlight filtering through windows high on the walls. They were back at ground level. But where? The old Hartwell place, Dolores said, recognizing their surroundings. Been abandoned for 15 years. Maya helped the older woman up the basement stairs to the main floor. The house was gutted, stripped of anything valuable, but the bones of the structure remained sound. "We need to get out of town," Maya said. "Get to the FBI field office in Columbus. Turn over everything I've collected." "No good," Dolores shook her head. "Deputy Director Chen isn't the only Fed involved. The program has people everywhere. You go to the wrong office, you're dead." Maya's phone buzzed with another email from Thorne's Dead Man's Switch. "The Testament protocol files are hidden in the place where your story began. Look for what doesn't belong. The truth is, in the foundation." "Where my story began," Maya murmured. "The church. He hid the main files back at the church. That's the first place they'll look. No, it's the last place. They think they've already found everything Thorne hid there." Maya was already heading for the front door. "Besides, I know something they don't." "What's that?" "I'm an architect. I see structures they don't even know exist." Outside, the abandoned house sat at the edge of Millbrook's old industrial district. Maya could see the church spire in the distance, dark against the star-filled sky. Between here and there, she counted at least 6 sets of headlights moving in coordinated search patterns. "They've got the whole town locked down," Dolores observed. "Good thing we're not using the roads." Maya led them across a vacant lot toward a row of abandoned factory buildings. Her architectural eye automatically cataloged the industrial infrastructure: steam tunnels connecting the buildings, service corridors, maintenance access ways. "More tunnels?" Dolores asked. "Different kind. These are utilitarian, not historical, but they'll get us close to the church without being seen." They slipped into the nearest factory through a broken loading dock door. The interior was a maze of defunct machinery and empty assembly lines, but Maya could see the raised concrete channels that had once carried steam pipes throughout the complex. "This way." They followed the steam tunnel system as it wound between buildings, under streets, past the foundations of structures that had been torn down decades ago. Maya's phone provided the only light, casting eerie shadows on the industrial architecture around them. "How do you know about all this?" Dolores asked as they crawled through a section where the tunnel narrowed. "I spent my career studying how buildings connect to each other, how infrastructure creates hidden pathways through urban spaces. Most people only see the surface level, walls, doors, windows. But underneath, every city is honeycombed with service tunnels, utility corridors, forgotten passages. Like Pastor Thorne's underground network." "Exactly. He understood that control comes from knowing the hidden structure of things, the pathways nobody else sees." They emerged from the steam tunnels in the basement of a building directly across from St. Catherine's Church. Through the basement windows, Maya could see the burned structure silhouetted against the sky. But something was different. Lights were moving inside the church. Flashlights, work lamps. People were already there, searching through the ruins. "Damn it," Maya breathed. "We're too late." "Maybe not," Dolores said quietly. "Look at what they're doing." Maya studied the movement of lights inside the church. The searchers were focused on the nave, the altar area, the office where she'd found the first cache of evidence. They were looking in all the obvious places. But Maya was thinking like an architect, not a treasure hunter. "The foundation," she said suddenly. "Thorne said the truth is in the foundation." "What do you mean?" Maya pulled out the building plans she'd studied online before buying the church. She'd memorized them out of professional habit, but now she saw something she'd missed before. The church has a full basement level, but the entrance to the tunnels was only accessible from the altar. That means there's another basement section that isn't connected to the tunnel system. A separate foundation? A sealed foundation, probably filled in decades ago and forgotten. Maya studied the plans more carefully, but Thorne would have found a way to access it. "Look, there's a discrepancy in the measurements. The exterior dimensions don't match the interior layout. There's a space unaccounted for." Maya traced her finger along the building plans. "Here, on the north side, there's about 8 feet of space that doesn't appear in any of the interior rooms, but it's too small to be just thick walls. Another hidden chamber? Not hidden. Forgotten. Probably part of the original 1890s construction that got walled off during later renovations." Maya looked up at the church. "And if Thorne found it, that's where he'd put his most important secrets." They waited for the search teams inside the church to move to a different section, then crossed the street quickly and slipped around to the north side of the building. Maya ran her hands along the stone foundation, looking for any sign of an entrance to the sealed section. "There," Dolores whispered, pointing to a section of stonework that looked slightly different from the rest. Maya examined it closely. The mortar was newer, maybe 20 years old instead of a century. Someone had carefully removed and replaced stones in a pattern that would be invisible unless you knew what to look for. She found a loose stone and worked it free. Behind it was a metal handle, green with age but still functional. The hidden panel swung inward, revealing a crawl space that led into the foundation's forgotten section. "I'm too old for this," Dolores said, looking at the narrow opening. "Stay here and keep watch. If you see anyone coming, text me." Maya squeezed through the opening into a space that felt like stepping back in time. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood. Her phone's light revealed a chamber about 8 feet wide and 20 feet long, filled with wooden crates and metal filing cabinets. But in the center of the space was something that made her heart race. A modern computer setup, with multiple servers humming quietly in the darkness. Thorne's Testament Protocol. Maya approached the computer and found a note taped to the monitor. "Maya, the servers contain complete documentation of the Millbrook program dating back to 1983. Personnel files, budget allocations, psychological profiles, academic papers, congressional briefings, everything needed to expose the truth. But the program is larger than Millbrook. This town was just the pilot project. There are 17 other communities currently under similar management, with plans to expand to over 200 locations. The files are encrypted and uploaded to multiple secure servers worldwide. The encryption key is something only you would know, the date your father died, combined with the address of your childhood home. Use this information wisely. The program has killed to protect its secrets, and they will kill again." W.T. Maya's hands shook as she entered the encryption key. Her father had died on March 15, 2001. Their address had been 1247 Elm Street. She typed 03151-247. The servers came alive, screens filling with documents, recordings, photographs. Maya scrolled through files with growing horror and amazement. The Millbrook program hadn't just been about social control through managed corruption. It had been a proof of concept for something much larger, a systematic approach to governing American communities through controlled criminal networks. The academic papers described it in clinical terms: behavioral management through selective law enforcement and the psychology of complicit citizenship. Now, the budget documents showed millions in federal funding funneled through Black Ops accounts. But most damning were the personnel files. Deputy Director Chen was just one of dozens of federal agents embedded in communities across the country. The program had people in the FBI, DEA, ATF, even local police departments. Maya found a folder labeled Subject Recruitment and opened it with dread. Inside were psychological profiles of dozens of people like her, individuals who had been systematically isolated, traumatized, and manipulated into positions where they could be recruited as assets. Her own file was there, complete with details about her childhood trauma, her architectural skills, her marriage, her vulnerabilities. David's involvement wasn't just cruelty. It was a precisely calculated recruiting tool. But she also found something else in the files: a list of other subjects who had refused recruitment. Most were marked terminated or relocated. Maya was supposed to be expendable. Her phone buzzed. Text from Dolores. "Company coming. Multiple vehicles." Maya grabbed a portable drive and began copying the most critical files. Personnel records, budget documents, recordings of congressional briefings where elected officials discussed the program as if manipulating American communities was perfectly normal. Outside, she could hear vehicles pulling up, doors slamming, voices coordinating a search. The portable drive finished copying just as Maya heard footsteps approaching the hidden entrance. She pocketed the drive and looked around desperately for another way out. In the far corner of the chamber, she spotted something that made her smile grimly: an old coal chute, sealed decades ago, but still intact. It would lead directly to the street outside. Maya began working at the rusted bolts holding the chute cover in place. Behind her, she could hear someone examining the hidden entrance she'd used. "Found something," a voice called. "Looks like recent access." The bolts finally gave way, and the chute cover swung open. Maya squeezed into the narrow passage and began crawling upward toward the street level. She emerged from the coal chute on the far side of the church, behind a row of evergreen trees that concealed her from the search teams. But as she stood up, brushing dirt from her clothes, she came face to face with someone she wasn't expecting. Rachel, her sister, standing there like she'd been waiting. "Hello, Maya," Rachel said quietly. We need to talk. But Maya was done talking. She was done being manipulated, betrayed, used as a pawn in other people's games. The portable drive in her pocket contained enough evidence to bring down a federal program that had destroyed thousands of lives. She was also done running. "No," Maya said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "We really don't." Before Rachel could respond, Maya pulled out her phone and did something she'd never imagined herself capable of. She called a press conference. Not the FBI, not local law enforcement, not any official channel that could be compromised or controlled. She called every major news organization in her contacts list and sent a simple message. Federal corruption story. Millbrook, Ohio. Come alone. Bring cameras. Then she looked at her sister, the person who had helped orchestrate the destruction of her life, and smiled. "You wanted to see what happens when I finally break? You're about to find out." Maya stared at her sister across the shadows, cast by the church's evergreen trees. Rachel looked exactly the same as she had at their last family dinner. Perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive clothes, the confident smile of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her actions. "You called the media," Rachel said, not quite managing to hide the fear in her voice. "That was unexpected." "Was it?" "Because according to Pastor Thorne's files, you and David spent 2 years profiling my psychological responses. You should have seen this coming." Rachel's smile faltered. "Maya, you don't understand the bigger picture. The program creates managed criminal networks to control American communities. I've read the academic papers, Rachel. All of them. Including the ones that describe people like me as expendable recruitment assets." The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Maya could see news vans turning onto Main Street, their satellite dishes extended, camera crews jumping out with professional efficiency. "They'll be here in 5 minutes," Maya said, checking her phone. "CNN, Fox, NBC, ABC, The Washington Post. I sent them all the same message with GPS coordinates and a promise of the story of the century." Rachel pulled out her own phone. "I can call this off. Tell them it was a hoax, a prank. You don't know what you're starting." "I know exactly what I'm starting. The end of your little experiment." "It's not little, Maya. The program manages 17 communities across 6 states. Thousands of people depend on the stability it provides. End the program, and you destroy their lives." Maya felt a flicker of doubt, but then she remembered the files she'd seen, the terminated subjects, the families destroyed for resisting recruitment, the systematic abuse disguised as social order. "Those aren't lives," she said. "They're controlled populations, lab rats in a maze designed by federal psychologists." The first news van pulled up to the church. Maya could see reporters and camera operators getting out, setting up equipment, preparing for whatever story had brought them to small-town Ohio at midnight. "Last chance," Rachel said. "Walk away from this, and we'll let you disappear. New identity, fresh start, enough money to rebuild your life anywhere you want. The same offer you gave the other subjects who refused recruitment." Rachel's silence was answer enough. Maya walked toward the news crews, the portable drive heavy in her pocket. She'd never held a press conference before, never been on camera for anything more significant than a local architecture award. But she'd spent the last 12 hours learning that her entire life had been a lie, and that knowledge had burned away her fear of public speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out as she approached the assembled reporters. "Thank you for coming. My name is Maya Chen, and I have evidence of a federal program that has been systematically corrupting American communities for over 40 years. The cameras turned toward her, lights blazing in the darkness. Maya felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely powerful. For the first time since her divorce, she was the one controlling the narrative. "The evidence is contained on this drive." She held up the portable storage device. "Personnel files, budget documents, academic papers, and recordings proving that federal agents have been deliberately creating and managing criminal networks in small towns across America." "Ms. Chen?" A reporter from CNN stepped forward. "These are serious allegations. Can you provide any verification of your claims?" Maya opened her phone and played one of the recordings she'd copied from Thorne's servers. Deputy Director Chen's voice filled the night air, clear and unmistakable. "The Millbrook pilot has exceeded all expectations. We've achieved 97% population compliance through managed corruption networks. Subject recruitment protocols are functioning as designed. Recommend immediate expansion to Phase 2 locations." The reporters exchanged glances, recognizing the significance of what they were hearing. This recording was made 6 months ago, Maya continued. It's one of hundreds documenting a federal program that targets isolated communities, systematically corrupts local leadership, and uses blackmail to control entire populations. Who else is involved in this program? Asked a reporter from the Washington Post. Maya was about to answer when she heard the sound of helicopters approaching. Military helicopters, moving fast and low. Shit, she breathed. The reporters looked up as 3 black helicopters swept over the church, searchlights blazing. They circled once, then began landing in the field adjacent to the cemetery. "Federal agents!" Rachel shouted over the noise of the rotors. "Everyone on the ground! Now!" But the reporters didn't drop. They kept filming, kept recording, recognizing that something extraordinary was happening. The helicopters had just confirmed Maya's story in the most dramatic way possible. Armed figures in tactical gear poured out of the helicopters, moving with military precision toward the church. But they stopped short when they saw the news crews, unsure how to proceed with cameras rolling and a live national audience watching. "This is Deputy Director Sarah Chen, FBI," came an amplified voice from one of the helicopters. "This is a matter of national security. All media personnel need to leave the area immediately." "Actually," Maya said, stepping closer to the cameras, "this is exactly why you need to stay." She pulled out her phone again and played another recording, this one of Deputy Director Chen discussing the termination of uncooperative subjects. Subject 47 refused recruitment and threatened exposure. Implemented permanent solution via staged vehicle accident. Recommend similar protocols for future non-compliance cases. The reporters were furiously taking notes, asking questions, keeping their cameras rolling despite the federal agents advancing toward them. "Ms. Chen," a Fox News correspondent pressed, "are you saying that federal agents have been murdering American citizens to protect this program?" "I'm saying that Pastor William Thorne documented everything. Every crime, every cover-up, every permanent solution implemented to keep the program secret." Maya held up the drive again. "And it's all here." More vehicles were arriving, local law enforcement, additional federal units, even some civilian cars that Maya recognized as belonging to Millbrook residents. The entire town was converging on St. Catherine's Church, but something unexpected was happening. Instead of supporting the federal agents, many of the locals were positioning themselves near the reporters, as if seeking protection from the cameras and media presence. "They can't kill all of us," Maya heard someone whisper. Not with the whole country watching. She realized that the people of Millbrook had been living in fear for decades, complying with the program not out of choice, but out of terror. The arrival of national media had suddenly given them something they'd never had before: witnesses. "Deputy Director Chen," Maya called out toward the helicopters. "Would you like to comment on the recording of you discussing the murder of uncooperative program subjects?" The amplified voice came back, but it was different now, less authoritative, more desperate. "Ms. Chen is making false allegations based on fabricated evidence. This is a matter of national security that cannot be discussed in a public forum." "Then let's discuss it in a federal courtroom," Maya replied. "I'm formally requesting protection as a whistleblower under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act. These documents prove systematic criminal activity by federal agents." One of the reporters, a veteran correspondent Maya recognized from network news, stepped forward with his microphone. "Deputy Director Chen, are you denying the authenticity of the recordings we've just heard? Are you denying the existence of the program Ms. Chen has described?" The silence from the helicopters spoke volumes. Maya could see tactical teams retreating slightly, unsure how to handle a situation that had spiraled completely out of their control. But she also saw something else that made her blood run cold. Sheriff Brennan was emerging from one of the local police vehicles, and he wasn't alone. Judge Morrison, Mayor Campbell, and a dozen other Millbrook officials were with him. They were all carrying weapons. "The feds might hesitate to murder people on live television," Maya whispered to the nearest reporter. "But the locals don't have that same restraint." The reporter, his name tag read, Marcus Webb, CNN, nodded grimly. "How many of them are compromised?" "All of them. The entire power structure of this town has been corrupted by the program." Sheriff Brennan raised a bullhorn. "This is Sheriff Tom Brennan. I'm ordering all media personnel to leave Millbrook immediately. You're interfering with an active federal investigation." "Sheriff," Marcus Webb called back, Can you comment on allegations that you've been covering up murders for the past 20 years? Brennan's face darkened. That's slander, and I won't tolerate it in my town. It's not slander if it's true, Maya said, loud enough for the cameras to pick up. She pulled out her phone one more time and played a recording of Brennan's own voice. The Henderson family was getting too close to the truth about the program. Made it look like a home invasion, but we killed all 4 of them. Kids, too. Can't leave loose ends. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the helicopter rotors seemed quieter as everyone processed what they'd just heard. You recorded me, Brennan said, his voice flat with shock. Thorne recorded everything. Everything, Maya confirmed. 40 years of confessions, 40 years of evidence, 40 years of your crimes. Brennan raised his weapon. Then I guess there's nothing left to lose. But before he could fire, something extraordinary happened. Dolores Mackenzie stepped out from behind one of the news vans, and she wasn't alone. With her were dozens of Millbrook residents, people Maya had never seen before, ordinary citizens who had been living under the program's control for decades. Put the gun down, Tom, Dolores said calmly. It's over. You don't understand what you're doing, Dolores. The program keeps this town stable. Without it, we might actually be free, interrupted a woman Maya didn't recognize. 40 years, Tom. 40 years of living in fear, of watching our neighbors disappear, of keeping our mouths shut about things that would make decent people sick. More locals emerged from the darkness. Shopkeepers, teachers, retirees, ordinary people who had been terrorized into compliance but were now finding courage in numbers and media attention. The program dies tonight, said an elderly man Maya recognized as the owner of the hardware store. We're done being your laboratory rats. Sheriff Brennan looked around at the crowd, his weapon wavering. You don't know what you're asking for. Without structure, without control, this town will tear itself apart. Maybe, Maya said, but that'll be our choice to make. The standoff stretched tautly as federal agents, corrupt locals, terrified residents, and national media all faced each other in the shadow of the burned church. Maya realized she was at the center of something much larger than her personal quest for revenge. She was witnessing the collapse of a system that had controlled American communities for decades. But the system wouldn't go quietly. Deputy Director Chen's voice crackled over the loudspeaker one final time. All personnel, implement Scenario 7. Complete operational security. Maya felt ice in her veins. She'd seen references to Scenario 7 in the files, the program's nuclear option. If exposure became imminent, they would eliminate all evidence, all witnesses, and all participants. Run, she whispered to Marcus Webb. Get your crews out of here. Now. But it was too late. The explosions began. Not from the helicopters or the tactical teams, but from within Millbrook itself. Buildings throughout the town erupted in coordinated blasts. The police station, City Hall, the library, the school. Every structure that might contain evidence of the program's activities was being systematically destroyed. Jesus Christ, Webb breathed, his camera operator still filming as the town burned around them. Maya realized with horrifying clarity what was happening. The program hadn't just corrupted Millbrook's leadership, it had prepared for this exact scenario. Explosive charges had been planted throughout the town, probably years ago, ready to erase 40 years of evidence in a matter of minutes. But as the buildings burned and sirens wailed in the distance, Maya clutched the portable drive tighter. They could destroy the physical evidence, but they couldn't erase what she'd already copied, what she'd already shared with the world. The program was collapsing, but it was taking Millbrook with it. And in the chaos of explosions and screaming, Maya saw Sheriff Brennan raising his weapon one final time, not at the reporters, at her. Time seemed to slow as Sheriff Brennan's finger tightened on the trigger. Maya could see the muzzle flash beginning, could feel the inevitability of the bullet that would end her story, just as she'd finally found the strength to tell it. But the shot never came. Dolores Mackenzie stepped between them at the last second, her frail body absorbing the bullet meant for Maya. The old woman crumpled to the ground, blood spreading across her faded floral dress. No. Maya dropped to her knees beside Dolores, pressing her hands against the wound. Stay with me, please. Dolores's eyes were already glazing, but she managed to whisper, 60 years I waited for someone like you. Don't let it be for nothing. Around them, chaos erupted. The reporters scattered for cover as more shots rang out. Not just from Brennan, but from the corrupt officials who had realized their world was ending. Federal agents emerged from the helicopters, but instead of joining the violence, they seemed confused, conflicted. The live television coverage had changed the rules of engagement completely. Maya looked up from Dolores's body to see Brennan advancing on her position, his weapon raised for another shot. But before he could fire, one of the Millbrook residents, a man Maya didn't recognize, tackled him from behind. Then another local joined in, and another. For 40 years, these people had lived under the sheriff's thumb. Now, with the whole world watching, they were finally fighting back. Maya! Marcus Webb from CNN was crouched behind his news van, camera still rolling. We need to get you out of here. But Maya wasn't running anymore. She stood up, Dolores's blood on her hands, and walked toward the nearest camera. This is what happens, she said, her voice carrying clearly over the sounds of violence and burning buildings. When a government program decides that American citizens are expendable test subjects, this woman died protecting the truth. Pastor William Thorne died trying to expose it. Dozens of families have been murdered to keep this secret. She held up the portable drive, now stained with blood. But the truth doesn't die with us. It lives on. The explosions around Millbrook were continuing, but Maya noticed something important. The church hadn't been destroyed. Either they'd forgotten to rig it with explosives, or Thorne had found and disabled them. The burned sanctuary stood intact, a symbol of survival amid the systematic destruction. Deputy Director Chen's voice crackled over the helicopter's loudspeaker one final time. Ms. Chen, you have 60 seconds to surrender that drive before we implement final protocols. Maya looked directly into the CNN camera. Deputy Director Sarah Chen is threatening to murder American citizens on live television, rather than allow evidence of federal crimes to reach the public. I want everyone watching to understand. This is what your government is willing to do to protect its secrets. She pulled out her phone and began uploading the drive's contents directly to social media platforms, news organizations, and government watchdog groups. Multiple uploads to multiple destinations, ensuring that even if she died in the next few minutes, the truth would survive. Upload complete, she announced to the cameras. The evidence is now public record. The silence from the helicopters was telling. Whatever final protocols Chen had threatened, they were now impossible to implement without confirming every allegation Maya had made. But Sheriff Brennan, bloodied but still armed, broke free from the locals restraining him. You destroyed everything, he screamed at Maya. 40 years of stability, of order. You have no idea what you've unleashed. I know exactly what I've unleashed, Maya replied, standing her ground as he approached. The truth, justice, freedom from your controlled corruption. Freedom? Brennan laughed bitterly. You think this ends here? You think Millbrook was the only town? There are dozens of communities under program control. Hundreds planned. You've just started a war you can't win. Maybe. But at least it's an honest war now. Brennan raised his weapon one final time, but before he could fire, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Not local law enforcement. Those were already here, and compromised. These were different. Federal agents, but not Chen's people. The vehicles that arrived bore the markings of the FBI's Internal Affairs Division, closely followed by cars from the Justice Department's Inspector General Office. Real federal law enforcement, responding to the evidence Maya had just made public. Deputy Director Chen must have realized the game was over, because the helicopters began lifting off, abandoning their ground teams and fleeing into the night. This is Special Agent Patricia Valdez, FBI Internal Affairs, came a voice over a loudspeaker from one of the new arrivals. All weapons are to be lowered immediately. This is now a federal crime scene. Sheriff Brennan looked around wildly, realizing he was surrounded by legitimate federal agents, hostile locals, and national media. His 40-year career of corruption was ending in the most public way possible. You don't understand, he said to Agent Valdez as she approached with her weapon drawn. The program was authorized. We had federal backing, congressional oversight. Then you'll have no trouble explaining that during your federal trial, Valdez replied calmly. Sheriff Tom Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under color of law. As Brennan was cuffed and led away, Maya felt a strange emptiness. The man who had tried to kill her, who had covered up decades of crimes, was finally facing justice. But Dolores was still dead. Pastor Thorne was still dead. Hundreds of people had suffered and died to protect the program's secrets, Ms. Chen? Agent Valdez approached her carefully. I understand you have additional evidence related to this case. Maya nodded, pulling out backup copies she'd made of the most critical files. Everything Pastor Thorne documented over 40 years. Personnel files, budget records, recordings of federal officials discussing the program. It's all here. We'll need to debrief you extensively. This investigation is going to be massive, potentially the largest corruption case in federal law enforcement history. What about the other towns? Maya asked. Brennan said there were dozens of communities under program control. Based on your evidence, we're already coordinating with field offices nationwide. By morning, there will be simultaneous raids in 17 states. Valdez's expression was grim. This is going to shake the foundation of federal law enforcement. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Maya found herself sitting on the steps of St. Catherine's Church, watching FBI agents process the scene of what would become known as the Millbrook Massacre, not because of the violence that had occurred, but because of the systematic slaughter of civil rights and human dignity that the evidence revealed. Marcus Webb approached with his camera operator, still documenting everything. How does it feel, he asked, to have brought down a 40-year federal conspiracy? Maya considered the question. How did it feel? Dolores was dead. Her marriage had been destroyed by calculated cruelty. Her life had been manipulated from the beginning. The town around her lay in ruins, both literally and figuratively, but for the first time in years she felt clean, honest, free. It feels like the beginning, she said finally. Not the end. The beginning of what? Maya stood up and looked at the church she'd bought for $25. The burned sanctuary that had hidden 40 years of secrets. The place where she'd discovered not just the truth about others, but the truth about herself. The beginning of rebuilding, not just Millbrook, but the idea that ordinary people can stand up to systems that seem too big to fight. Over the following weeks, Maya's story dominated national headlines. The Millbrook program, as it came to be known, was exposed as one of the most extensive domestic surveillance and control operations in American history. Congressional hearings were announced. Dozens of federal officials resigned. Hundreds of local officials across multiple states were arrested. Maya testified before Congress, her words broadcast live to millions of Americans. The program succeeded for 40 years because it convinced people that corruption was inevitable, that abuse of power was acceptable, that ordinary citizens were powerless against systematic oppression. But the truth is simpler than that. Corruption only survives when good people decide it's easier to look away than to speak up. David and Rachel were among the first to be prosecuted. Maya's ex-husband was sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy and psychological abuse. Her sister received 12 years for her role in the recruitment and manipulation scheme. Maya didn't attend their sentencing hearings. She was busy. 6 months after the events at St. Catherine's Church, Maya stood in the same burned sanctuary, but it looked completely different. The roof had been rebuilt, the windows replaced, the interior restored. But instead of pews, the space now contained desks, computers, and filing cabinets. The Thorne Foundation for Government Accountability had taken over the church, transforming it into a center for investigating and exposing government corruption. Maya served as its director, using her architectural skills to uncover the hidden structures of power and abuse. Ms. Chen, her assistant, a young journalist named Jennifer, approached with a stack of files. We've received another tip. Small town in Oregon, suspicious patterns in their law enforcement budget allocations. Maya accepted the files with a familiar sense of purpose. The work would never end. There would always be another conspiracy to uncover, another abuse of power to expose, another group of ordinary people who needed someone to believe their story. But that was okay. She had found her calling in the ruins of her old life. What's the town's name? She asked, already reaching for her laptop. Cedar Falls. Population 8,000. The tipster says their police chief has been covering up disappearances for 20 years. Maya smiled grimly. Then I guess we're taking a road trip to Oregon. Outside the restored church, a sign had been erected in Dolores Mackenzie's memory. The truth belongs to everyone, but it requires someone brave enough to speak it. Maya had learned that bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite the fear. She'd been afraid every moment of that terrible night 6 months ago. She was still afraid now, knowing that powerful people wanted her silenced, that every investigation put her life at risk. But she was no longer alone. The Millbrook revelations had inspired thousands of whistleblowers, journalists, and ordinary citizens to start looking more carefully at their own communities, their own officials, their own hidden structures of power. The program that had controlled 17 communities had fallen. But Maya knew there would be others, different methods, different agencies, different justifications for treating American citizens as test subjects in experiments they never consented to join. That was fine. Let them come. Maya Chen had bought a burned church for $25 and discovered that the price of truth was everything she thought she valued. Her marriage, her family, her safety, her old life. But in return, she'd gained something far more valuable. The knowledge that ordinary people, armed with courage and evidence, could bring down systems of oppression that seemed invincible. The church bells that Dolores had helped her install chimed 6 o'clock, calling Maya back to work. There were more files to review, more investigations to launch, more truth to uncover. Pastor William Thorne had spent 40 years collecting confessions, thinking he was building power through other people's secrets. But his real legacy wasn't the blackmail or the corruption. It was the proof that no system of abuse, no matter how sophisticated or well-protected, could survive the light of truth spoken by someone who refused to be silenced. Maya opened her laptop and began reading about Cedar Falls, Oregon. By morning, she'd be driving west, following another trail of suspicious deaths and covered-up crimes. The work continued. The truth remained dangerous. But Maya Chen was no longer afraid of dangerous truths. She had become one herself.